everybody, and welcome to the Kunua podcast. Today we've got John Reardon with us. John, how are you doing?
Very good. Thanks, Marie. Great to be here.
So John is a senior leadership development consultant, if I can get that out correctly. John, would you like to tell us a bit more about how you've got where you are and what kind of things you do?
Yeah, sure, Marie. I like to say I came into this, what they call through the back door, meaning I didn't do this in undergrad or graduate school. I got involved in leadership development as a college student and then continued with student leadership development. And then really my formative experience was in Uganda in the 1990s, where I helped establish a leadership development academy, a school with emphasis on leadership development, spiritual development, character development. And then coming back to the States, had the opportunity to work with Cindy Zook, who has been in the field for years, and she taught me the ropes and brought her into the practice. And I realized this is something I could do for a career. And yeah, so I've been doing it ever since for the past 20, 30 years.
I think leadership development is such an exciting area to be in as well. And I think your website shows that there's so much that we can learn about this topic.
There's something compelling to me about supporting people who are trying to do great things and helping them, encouraging them, challenging them to expand, I like to say, expand their capacity to accomplish great results, right? It's just very fulfilling to me. And it really is a way that I can impact the world by supporting and encouraging and challenging people who are doing great stuff.
So going on to your kind of course offering, I see that you've got some really exciting topics on there, and I think these are kind of really key to developing future leaders. I wanted to talk first about the leadership during change, because I know that a lot of people have been asking me about that recently, and they're not sure where to start. So how would they start with this type of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question, in that I think something unique that I hit on, some years ago, but it is that much more relevant today, is, if you do a Google search for on leading change, you will get 1 billion hits, and the vast majority of those are directed at the leader who is introducing a concept, a change, an idea, and you want to introduce it to the organization, and you want to move your team or organization from point A to point B, and you are the champion for that change. Good luck with that. The reality is, if that's your situation, that's great. And then that literature may be useful to you. 99% of the time, that's not the case. The vast majority of the time, either I'm implementing a change that someone else is driving into the organization, or that is happening whether I like it or not, right? It wasn't my idea, it's happening, and we have to cope with this. And that is a huge shift. It's a very different concept. Waking up one morning and having a brilliant idea and calling you and saying, "Oh, Marie, I have this exciting idea. I want you to join me in this effort. It's going to be fantastic." Great, that's leading change. But then there's the other time when we watch the news and we realize, holy smoke, this is happening whether we like it or not. We have to manage this. And that is a very different leadership challenge, very different. And so I like to say there's championing change, but the vast majority of the time we're either implementing change, which is someone else's idea, or it's happening and we have to carry it out, like it or not. And then there's a third category that I call surviving change. And that's when change is happening, but there's no clear endpoint, right? So very often change occurs and there is no clear destination. It's just the old is gone, right? COVID happened. We don't know what's going to happen. So many of my clients, they don't know what the future is going to hold. And so they have to survive the change process and lead their teams through that survival. It's a very, very distinct leadership challenge. So I like to say, when it comes to leading change, the first question is, what's your role? Are you championing a change that is your idea, or you're leading the charge? Or are you implementing something that was given to you or foisted upon you, or you don't have a choice, or you have to step in and run that change? Or are you surviving change, where your job is to maintain morale, maintain your own morale, and maintain the morale of your team so we can survive through this?
So there you've given us a whole nice big basket of things that as a leader we need to really do to be successful. And I think if I'd heard that 10, 20 years ago, I would have said, where do I start with this? How do I keep morale up? How do I keep processes going? How do I look after my team? Where should I kind of start, and how would I build on that? Because if you're saying that change has no end as well, which generally doesn't within a team, how can I manage my team through that effectively?
Yeah. And that's why that first question is so critical. What is my role? What is the situation? So many times I've been brought into an organization to help, and I find a leader who's, good for them. They're trying to develop a change strategy and they're following the correct steps, only to find that they're trying to create a vision, right? Leading change, you've got to have a vision. Well, what if there is no vision? Right? What if there is no destination other than survival? Then the vision is survival. And that's a huge mental shift that then leads to practical, like tactical implications. So instead of trying to make something up and blow smoke, as they say, like and create a false hope, you stop and you say, you know what? The vision is that we will make it. We just need to take it a day at a time. We can face today and we will make it to tomorrow. We can care for each other and encourage each other. And so the whole tone and the whole set of tactics changes when you're in survival mode, and then boosting morale, looking after each other, doing what we can do, building structure, building foundation, getting training and development to strengthen ourselves so that when we get out of this swamp, we will be better when we make it to the other side. There's a great metaphor, a true story around this, around Shackleton's attempt to get to the South Pole. And the ship gets frozen in and crushed by the ice, and they abandon ship and they have to live on the ice shelf, right, for months. He goes off. It's an incredible story. And off the ship, as it was being crushed, he made sure to take instruments and games and toys so that they would have something to do while they survived. And it was a great insight into this idea of sustaining morale in the midst of a really difficult situation. So there are tactics and practical implications, but it's a very different set when you're in survival mode, as many people are right now, to try to make it through this, versus when you're truly leading a change that has a clear destination and a clear set of goals.
I think there's kind of a few levels to this as well. There's kind of, maybe you might have been leading a team in a stable situation face to face, or you might have been leading a virtual team just in general. But if you had to do anything like move from a face-to-face team to a virtual team, or move from a face-to-face to a virtual while you're leading a change at the same time, and there's a lot of change going on as well, how can people cope with that type of change? Or even if they've been promoted while the team has been transitioning from face-to-face to virtual, there seems to be a bit of a problem there with maybe relationship building or things like that in terms of technique.
Yeah, you're touching on, just in those sentences, you've touched on quite a few factors. One is this concept of and I don't know where the phrase comes from, called suddenly virtual, right? So again, if you go to the literature, if you look online and do a search for leading virtual teams, 99% of what you're going to find is pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. And those are intentionally virtual teams, right? Intentionally virtual organizations, where the team members signed up knowing they would work virtually, and the leader signed up knowing it was structured to work virtually. And the expectation is, if you're going to take a job with a virtual team, you have the equipment and you have a home office, or you have, right, you kind of know what you're getting into. Suddenly virtual is none of that. Everyone is just thrown into this. The staff members, the managers, the organizations themselves, they're not structured for virtual work. They're not ready for virtual work. Everybody's, scrambling to try to figure it all out. And that is a very different context with an incredibly different set of stressors. So many of my clients and I have kids at home. We're working with clients, children are climbing on their laps, there's knocks on the door and there's banging and the dog is barking. People, by and large, so many of us didn't choose to go into the virtual world. We were thrown into it in a suddenly virtual. So that's one really important premise. From that comes this idea of caring for your people. That is a very important priority right now. You can't just jump on the call and get straight to work. You've got to set a separate time prior to check in. How are you doing? Are you okay? How's home? How are the kids? How's your parents? The set of concerns in the midst of this situation run the entire gamut from people who are thriving and they love it and they're happy as a clam in mud, and that's great for them, all the way to the other side where people have lost family members. They have close family members who are hospitalized or, God forbid, passed away. And you can't just jump in and go on with business as if that's not happening. Leave alone the day-to-day stressors of kids being around and noise and, distractions. And so really being attentive. So then that takes me to the third point, which is put your own oxygen mask on first and then assist others. And that phrase, if we can remember it from when we used to fly, it's an incredibly important point, right? That I am not going to be helpful to others if I don't have my own oxygen mask on. And, as anyone on the team, when I say leadership, I'm not talking about who the boss is. I'm saying every member of the team to be attentive. Am I caring for myself in such a way that I can then assist others? So if I don't keep that oxygen mask on and find the oxygen for myself and find balance and sustain that balance, it is a very different ballgame today in this suddenly virtual world than it was prior. And I've got to reconstruct and set boundaries and have day-to-day practices that help me sustain oxygen so that I can be a better support to others.
I think that's such a key concept. And I kind of want to switch gears now in the middle of that and talk about the core values. And I think this kind of links in nicely with the first part. But with the core values, how do you kind of teach that? Because it seems quite complex, but it seems really fundamental. So just talk us through that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, it is very fundamental. What I like to say, foundational, right? It's a foundation for leadership. What are the core values that I espouse, that I want to live by, leave alone lead by? And it's so interesting. I don't know about there, but in the United States, I mean, that phrase gets thrown around. Values, core values, values driven, values centered. If I had a nickel for every time I heard the phrase values, well, we treat it lightly, but it's a very serious concept and it's a real challenge. 9 times out of 10, if I would put you on the spot and say, okay, right now, Marie, list your core values. What are they? Right? We all know we have them, but we don't spend a lot of time actually defining them, right? And actually making them clear and visible and tangible, and then practicable, right? How do I implement these values? So we sort of hold them loosely, but we don't really know what we're doing. So this challenge of what are my core values? And again, early on, an exercise that, sometimes you realize what you want when you see what you don't want. So we had this exercise that was shown to me to help someone with values. And they gave a list of like 50 values. And you look through the list and circle the ones that are important to you. Well, I went through the list and I circled about 30 of them. Right? I was like, well, I guess I have 30 core values. I was like, that is not the point. There are many important things in the world and many valuable things, right? But when it comes to my core values, right? The apple has a core. What's at the center? There are a few that really drive my behavior and my choices, or that I want those to drive my behavior, and I don't always live up to them. But what are those few core values? And that to me is a much more significant exercise than looking at a list. It's asking myself, what are those? And so there's a few different practices that I encourage folks to use. One is a life timeline, right? What are the forces that have impacted you in your life? And what have those forces taught you? How have they shaped you? Right? And what values have they shaped in you? And that's one way to get into what's really more at the core. Another one that's interesting, I find, is the hot button exercise, right? What are your hot buttons? What sets you off? And sometimes underneath the hot button is a core value that's being stepped on, right? So I can't stand it when people are like cut someone off in traffic and they drive up and they push themselves in at the front. Well, you might say, well, anybody would get frustrated, but it really gets at me. And I realized a coach helped me see under the levels of frustration is a core value of respect. And that is so disrespectful. And that's why wow, it's a hot button for me. And then I realized, that shows up in a lot of ways in my life. Respect is a core value that I really want to myself demonstrate respect. And I really expect others, if we're going to work together, we need to talk about this because that's a core value for me. And so it opens up this depth of what are those core values? Where did they come from, right? What shapes those in me? And then how do they show up in day-to-day life so that we can work better together? Because if you know my core values and I know yours, now we can find shared values and really align and get going.
I think that's such a neat little way of packaging that, because I think values can be so problematic, especially when, if you're challenging values and you're looking at the values that you've got and you try to get to the bottom of a particular value, and it might not be a positive value, it might be a negative one, and you figure out that actually that value comes from somewhere that I've just assumed that I should maybe take that value on.
Yeah.
So I find that part of it really interesting too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'm sure you've seen this experience. You walk into an organization and there's a poster on the wall, right? And it says, our core values: excellence, integrity, people, diversity, all the buzzwords that they're supposed to have. And then you ask the staff members, right, at the front lines, what do you think of that poster over there? Oh, the eye rolling and that, right? And they know that it's a bunch of BS on posters. Like, they have the words, but they're not actually doing it. And that's the difference between, that's where the integrity to say, if I believe this is a core value that I want to live up to, then I have to ask myself, am I doing it? Where am I falling short? I mean, I fall short on my core values every day, but it is that compass that points me back to the true north. This is where I want to go, and making decisions and choices and assessing my behavior. Am I living up to those, right? It becomes very practical.
How many core values do you think the general person has?
I've been working at this for years, and I have distilled mine down to 3, because I find that I can put anything else in those 3. So personally, relationships, respect, and responsibility. Relationships covers my faith, covers my priority around my family, my immediate family, my extended family. It covers relationships with colleagues. When I work with someone, I love to have a real relationship with them, and I want to see people as real and have a relationship around the world. So that's a huge concept for me, but that's a simple expression, right, of a big idea, but it's a value: relationships. Respect. With the relationships comes respect. I strive to respect anyone, whether they're the king or whether they're a peasant, whether they're the leader or the follower. It doesn't matter to me. Respecting every human being, every life, for its own worth. And I want others, right, to espouse that. That's a driving core value for me. And then responsibility, this idea of, I have a responsibility in the world, and I believe everyone has a responsibility in the world, and being responsible for myself, but also learning to take some responsibility to coach, encourage, challenge others. And so those 3: relationships, respect, responsibility, they are what I've narrowed it down to. Now, those encompass many. So I like to say, when I'm coaching with somebody, I like to say 3 to 5 to 6. If you start to go beyond that, it starts to turn into a long kind of a laundry list of, well, there's beauty and creativity and expertise and excellence and integrity and family. And so you're like, okay, hang on a second. Like, really, your life is driven by 50 things? So I think it's interesting to see how they kind of narrow down, they distill out, they nest. Sometimes you have a bigger concept that holds other ones within it. And it's a bit of a process to kind of get down to those really core ones.
So do you think this comes back to mindset, where you have to not only figure out your values, but then kind of look at your behaviors on how you're expressing this? What is it? There seems to be kind of a thread going through it. Do you think that that's to do with mindset?
Yeah, that's an interesting word. Yeah, absolutely. Mindset. I don't know about you, but 20 years ago when I started working with Cindy Zuck, it was like a wake up call. Like, literally, it was like scales fell from my eyes. I suddenly had this experience of realizing that I have core values. I don't know what they are, but I know I have them. I have strengths. I don't know how to define them, but I know I bring something to the table, and I have personality. And I like to use those 3 areas. They overlap in a Venn diagram. But personality, as simple as, how do I behave on a day-to-day basis? What are my preferences, and how do I operate? And am I aware of that? We all have those. The difference is, am I on a journey towards being aware of and using those? So that word mindset, am I awake to that? Or am I just operating on a day-to-day, if it works, great. If it doesn't, tough luck, I mean, really, that's a very absolute distinction in mindset. There's a great quote that has really summarized, I came across this about 10 years ago, summarizes everything I do in leadership developments, Rob Goffey and Gareth Jones. And the quote from their article is, be yourself with more skill. Be yourself with more skill. 5 words. And it's so powerful because then there's other quotes that are similar. It's this idea that be yourself. I mean, that you could say be yourself, period. That's a lifelong journey. And who are you? What are your strengths? What are your core values? Who do you want to be in the world? And I'm still on that journey, right? 30 years into this work, I'm still on that journey to figure out who am I so that I can truly be myself. I wasted a lot of time trying to be someone else, right? I had mentors, I had who I wanted to be more like them instead of being more like me, more of my true self. But it doesn't stop there. If it was be yourself, period, it would be a little selfish, right? Marie, this is who I am. If you don't like it, tough, get over it, right? I'm being myself, whether you like it or not. But it doesn't stop there. It's be yourself with more skill. And that is a real kicker. It's not be different than me. It's be skillful with who I am. So, if we meet at the coffee shop, I'm an extrovert. I've learned that I could talk to a brick wall for hours. But it's a skill for me to stop talking and ask and listen and give you an opportunity and learn from you, right? But that's a skill for me as opposed to a natural inclination. So be yourself, bring your gifts, bring your strengths, bring your values to the table, to the world, but do it with more skill.
That's really interesting, because I think if you ask somebody to not only be themselves, but then enhance themselves, it's like you said, the journey that you go on to be yourself when you're trying not to be other people, that's even bigger in some ways than just saying, let me try and find my values and then act them and try and be a reasonable leader. I think it seems to me that there's so much work that you can do on yourself as a leader to improve all the time. It seems to just be something that just would never end. And I suppose if it did, there wouldn't be much fun in it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I love to start out a conversation around leadership with an image of, I'm very visual. I love the image of a road going off in the distance and the journey. Welcome to the journey. It's leadership is a journey, not a destination. Developing, growing, learning. And I mean, we've only spoken about myself and be myself with more skill. What about you? And learning as a leader and as a colleague. Again, leadership at all levels means I want to learn about you and encourage you and challenge you to be yourself with more skill. And what are your values and your strengths, and help you be on that journey to discover. And that starts to really build. And I'm sure you've had this experience, you can walk into a team and you can get a sense pretty quickly of, are they on that journey or are they not on that journey? Are they working together to make each other better and and expand their capacity or are they just every man, woman, and child for themselves and everybody's operating on their own? And, it's a really distinct ethos in a team, in an organization.
Yeah, that's another long discussion on how you can deal with a team. Because I think normally when you come into a job, the team is the number 2 variety, and that's why maybe the manager left, and that's all about putting the team back together.
Yeah, that's right. It's exponentially more complex, but at the same time, I think there are core. I love the metaphor of the toolkit, right? And there are many. You go to the hardware store, and there's a lot of different tools, very specialized tools, and that's great. At the same time, there are some basics, right? And those basics really come in handy. I mean, really, the hammer and the saw and the like. These are some fundamentals that I think if a leader can really get their hands on some of those fundamental tools, and then over time add some of those specialized tools to their toolkit, that's great. But you don't want to walk in and be overwhelmed by a billion different options. It's like, let's start with the basics and then add.
Well, John, we're coming to the end of the interview, and I could talk to you for hours on this, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you. Would you like to tell people where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, sure. Pretty simple, johnreardon.com. We have the material on the website and been moving into the space of online courses, some short 2-hour modular courses that you can use as an individual or with your team, and or complement with virtual trainings and things. And that's been a great journey. And there's a lot of resources on there that you can just go on and pick out and download just for free, just to use to support you and your teams as you achieve great results.
And we'll link all this below so you can jump straight over to John's courses and his website and check out what he's up to. Thank you so much, John, for being a guest today.
Thanks, Marie. Pleasure. Great to talk with you.